Good evening, everyone. Welcome to City and Islington's Sixth Form College's evening about applying to Oxbridge. My name is Dominic Eady and I'm the Deputy Director at the Angel campus where the Sixth Form is based. This time last year we did this presentation in our hall and we had a nice big audience and I was speaking to people face to face, and of course this year we have the lockdown, so this has become a virtual event. Nevertheless, applying to university is a big step in a young person's life. And although I believe most of you will be in year 12, it is worth thinking about making these applications now. And we know that Oxbridge is especially competitive, so getting ahead of the game is always a good plan. And so here we are in January thinking about the application, which will be probably finished in the autumn, in October, and obviously moving forward to starting university in 2022. So this evening we've got a couple of excellent speakers. We've got Will from Corpus Christi, our partner college at Cambridge, and he's going to be making most of the presentation. And we also have Lati, who is one of our former students who is currently in her final year at Cambridge studying sociology. Now, there will be further events later on in the year for parents and carers about next steps after A-levels. And that will be covering all of UCAS, so not just the Oxbridge aspect. It will also include degree apprenticeships, discussions of art foundation programs for those doing visual art programs, and also the possibility of gap years. So there will be more information coming out later on in a couple of months' time. But to start with, I'm going to hand over to Will, our representative from Cambridge, who's going to talk through the whole process of applying to Cambridge. So Will, over to you.
Great, thank you. Is my microphone coming through actually, and presentation, just to check?
Well, I can hear you.
Yep.
We haven't, people are still seeing me at the moment.
Okay.
Just bear with us, Will. Okay, Will, your presentation's up.
Great. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I just want to go through a few of the things that sort of, I suppose, define the Cambridge application process. And I'm not going to cover things in a massive amount of detail, but I really want to just give you a general outline of how the process works, what sort of things you need to be thinking about at the moment. And a lot of what I say is going to apply to places like Oxford as well. It's going to apply to other very competitive universities. Obviously, the particulars of the timeline that Cambridge has, for instance, is specific to Cambridge, but the more general advice about things like personal statements, interviews, stuff like that, that's going to apply a lot more generally. So the main thing that I want to share with you is just this sort of timeline of the application process at Cambridge. And this sort of just summarizes most of the stuff that we ask for, and also that a lot of other universities ask for as well. And this timeline really starts, I mean, in a sense it starts now, but in terms of the key events that you actually sort of be participating in, for instance, interviews, applying to someone like Cambridge, all of that is a lot later, sort of past the summer, really. So it's not for quite a long time, but it is very, very useful to start thinking about some of this now, particularly because there are three main things that you can sort of work towards with an application like this that I'll sort of cover in turn, each of which there are a particular set of skills and things that is very useful to practice that you can be starting to get on with now. And in fact, if you haven't started, to think about this stuff, it's a really good idea to begin at the moment. So the first thing that you will want to do is just to choose a course. There's a bit of information I've gotten later on in choosing college as well, which I think is quite important in terms of just living at Cambridge, knowing what a college is quite important. But it's not massively important to the actual application itself, and it's not that important to the to getting in, for instance. It's not on the academic side that crucial. But once you've sort of decided on what sort of a course you might want to do, the personal statement, the rest of the application is sort of what comes next. That sort of stuff that you can be starting to think about now, but primarily will sort of happen more in summer. We have a very early deadline, as does Oxford, for UCAS applications. It's the 15th of October. For us, lots of other universities ask you to apply a lot later, or at least the deadline's a lot later. So all of the things that you will have needed to have got over to us, all of the information or the aspects of the application will need to be done by that time. We ask for a bit more information than other universities as well, which I'll also go into, just and that's nothing particularly interesting. It's just a few little logistical administrative things that it's worth knowing about that sort of distinguishes a Cambridge application from some other applications. We also do admissions assessments, which is quite a key part of how we assess and how Oxford assess as well your application. I've got more to say about this later, but these divide into admissions assessments that you do sort of before the interview period and things that you do within the interview period. Yeah, there's more to say on that later. The other important thing is obviously the interview. That's, I suppose, less important at the moment to be thinking about. That's not till literally around this time next year. But again, it's just worth having a vague picture in your head at this kind of time. And I'll talk a tiny bit as well, just about how things look once the interview, which is the last stage of the application process, is completed. So that's essentially it from this timeline, and I think it's just useful to sort of have this picture in your head. Before moving on to some of those components, I just want to briefly talk about how we assess applications at Cambridge, and I think this is useful for other universities as well. We assess applications in what we like to call a holistic manner, which basically means that we are not concerned with, I suppose, quantifying individual aspects of the application process. For instance, putting a weight of 20%, say, on your personal statement. Rather, we want to look at all of the information that we're getting from applicants as a whole. We want to consider all of it in a sort of more qualitative and I suppose, in a sense, more human way than simply quantitatively weighting aspects of the process. So what that means for you as an applicant is that if you are, for instance, say you write a really amazing personal statement and you have some really good written work and stuff like that, say all of these things I've listed here are pretty good across the board, but let's say that your interview performance is not as good as you might have wanted it to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get a place somewhere like Cambridge, even though it is very competitive, because we'll look at your whole application across the board and we'll think, does this person sort of do we have a good academic picture, I suppose, of this person? Are they a candidate that's going to succeed at Cambridge? Are they going to do well on the course? We'll be asking very general questions like that, rather than, what grade did this person get on their interview, for instance, what was their interview score? So hopefully that makes sense, that we're more interested in this general academic picture than we are with weighting individual aspects of the statement. And it just means, of the application. And this just means that you can afford to fall down in certain areas of an application, even somewhere as competitive as Cambridge. And I suppose, in a sense, then the idea of the application process is, in a sense, reorientated. And instead of seeing all of these things, for instance, that we ask students to submit or do for us as individual hurdles that you need to get over to get to the next stage, you can view them as different opportunities to demonstrate that you are a good academic candidate. And hopefully that that sort of view of the application process makes things a little bit nicer. So this is the first important thing to mention. I think if there's one thing that I could encourage you to do on going away from this presentation, it is simply to think more about the course that you might want to do at university at this stage. There's some more detail to go into that, but that is really one of the most important things possible. There are several reasons why you need to spend quite a bit of attention on actual course choice. A lot of the time, people don't, even really know what they want to do until they actually come to apply to Cambridge and or any sort of competitive university. And that's very much, in a sense, that's a good thing. We're not expecting people to have an idea. I'm not expecting you, for instance, to have an idea of what you want to study right now. But I think some people think that you definitely should, even at this stage, know exactly what you want to do. So one of the first reasons that it's useful to sort of try and clarify this, or start thinking about this now, though, is that lots of courses at different universities do differ wildly, even though they have very similar names, or they look like they're offering the same content. So if you want to do politics somewhere like Cambridge, for instance, it's probably a good idea to, to pick something with politics in it, but we don't offer a straightforward politics degree. We offer history and politics, which is sort of a joint degree where you study both of those subjects, and we also offer human, social and political sciences, where again there's an opportunity to specialize in aspects of politics. But those courses look very different to a straightforward politics degree at another university. And I'm sure a straightforward, what you might think is a straightforward politics degree at another university probably looks different to another straightforward politics degree somewhere else. So it's really important to engage with the course content and what's offered on different university courses at this stage, so you actually know what you're applying for. Sometimes people think that they want to do a course in English, for instance, because they've really enjoyed their English A level. But actually they would really hate, half of the English courses that are offered at some universities, because they offer very different things. So it's really important to have a look at to have a look at what's offered at the moment. I'd suggest just going on university websites, universities you like the look of, and reading what exactly is offered in their courses. The other reason it's useful to start thinking about this early is that some subjects you probably won't have heard of before, unless you're really, really keen on them already for some reason. But actually, they might be something that you're interested in doing. So the example I've got here is Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic Studies. I believe that's just offered at Cambridge, although there are variants at other places as well. And that's a degree you might not have come across before, but I mean, to be very crude about it, it's essentially English, but you're looking at older stuff that's not quite English, and it's quite exciting, and sometimes there are monsters in it, or there are more monsters, I assume. And having a look on university websites, looking at the different courses, will bring you into contact with these sorts of things. And from there, you can start deciding whether some of these more niche courses as well are things for you. Often it's very useful to explore subjects that are related to something that you know you're already interested in, but have a slight edge or a slight spin. So if you're really into languages, for example, you might do a straightforward languages degree, but you equally might think about doing something like linguistics. And that deciding between those things, deciding, what you find interesting about a particular subject, or that might help you make that choice, that sort of brings me to the next point. And that is essentially that if you start thinking about what course you want to do now, it's the only way to really make that decision is to engage in stuff from the courses you're thinking about doing, to engage in obviously not undergraduate material, but material related to the course. If you're interested in physics, look at stuff to do with physics. If you're interested in Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, look at some Middle English or something like that. That's a really, really crucial aspect of doing well in the application process, but also deciding what you want to do. So if you start engaging in what we call super-curricular activities at this point in the year, And I have more to say on this in a second, but essentially if you start looking beyond the A-level curriculum at the moment, you start trying to find interesting articles, interesting videos, just interesting things in general about certain subjects that you might want to study at university, and you start engaging with that content, you're going to do a lot better when it comes to actually making an application to anywhere. And you're also going to get a much better sense of what you actually want to do at degree level. Because, really, how are you meant to know, for instance, whether you want to do a straightforward languages degree or or something like a linguistics degree if you haven't engaged in the appropriate literature? It's very difficult to know. So that would be my main piece of advice, really, of the whole presentation. I think you can view anything else really as a sideline. Really, is at the moment you should be trying to engage in content that goes beyond your A-level course, and you should be trying to scope out exactly what sort of course you might be interested in. And that comes from looking online at university websites, reading the course descriptions, and then trying to find interesting material about those things, figuring out whether that's actually something you're interested in. So yeah, the rest of this I can probably move through fairly quickly, and at the number of slides I've got, that's probably a good thing. So I just want to quickly talk about college choice. That was the other thing next to choosing a course in my timeline. College choice is something that isn't really going to academically influence you, and it's just a niche thing about Cambridge and Oxford that you might not be familiar with and other universities don't do. Colleges are essentially part of the university, but at Cambridge and Oxford, we don't have a straightforward sort of a big university campus or some kind of other unified structure. We have colleges which are all sort of semi-autonomous, and then we have faculties as well, and those are subject faculties. And the distinction is essentially that a college is where you'll spend your time living. There's a lot more to a college than that. So there are some academic provisions. There are some sort of more sort of pastoral provisions as well. But it's essentially where you'll live. This is a picture of Corpus Christi College, the college I represent. And whereas the subject faculty is where your main subject library will be, where you'll probably take your lectures, where probably all of your academic staff live, well, at least hang out. And those are the two main sort of aspects of the university that you come into contact with as an undergraduate. There's loads more to the university than that, but it's useful to be aware of this. And yeah, so there's a little bit of information on colleges and stuff on these slides here, which I'll distribute as presentations so that anything I don't sort of talk about in detail, you can have a look, and then you've got this as a sort of bank to refer back to. But the main point is that colleges are pretty different. They are, I mean, here are a few pictures of colleges. There are 29 undergraduate ones, as I mentioned, as I've got on the slide previously, but they differ wildly in terms of their look, in terms of their location, some other things as well, any special facilities, for instance, that they might have. Corpus Christi College, for instance, the college I represent, has this massive medieval archive called the Parker Library, which other colleges don't have. That's one of the perks of studying somewhere like Corpus, and that's why, for instance, people really interested in Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, for instance, might apply to Corpus Christi. But it doesn't really have any academic bearing. It's nevertheless still important to have had a think about it, because you may hate really modern architecture, for instance, so you might not want to go somewhere like Robinson, or you may really love modern architecture and absolutely not want to go somewhere like Trinity, for instance, which is one of the more famous ones and is fairly old. So those sorts of considerations, and also I think there's a, or maybe I haven't. Yes, here we go. And also where a college is as well. So the location of each college. It's just a nice thing to have thought about before applying somewhere like Cambridge. Because obviously, you're living there and you want to know, for instance, whether you're going to be a 5-minute cycle away from your subject faculty, or whether it's going to be more like 30 minutes or something like that. Some people, might want to live, say you're studying maths. Some people might choose Churchill College, because that means, I mean, that has a lot of STEM students, and also it means you're 5 minutes away, if that, from your mathematics faculty. But some people might want more space between where they study and where they and where they live. So someone might choose Jesus College because it's actually a fair way from the maths library and the maths faculty, and that would be another valid reason for choosing that college. So not particularly important, but give it a bit of thought, because it's where you'll be living for 3 to 4 years if you apply somewhere like Cambridge or Oxford. But there's not too much to say about that. And I've just included a little bit of information that I've sort of already mentioned about the subject faculties, but again, there's not too much need to go into detail on these. So now I thought I'd just quickly cover what we ask for in addition to other universities in terms of the applications. So we receive a lot of the same information as other universities. So we get a personal statement from you, we get references, predicted grades, GCSEs. We look at all of that information. We ask you to apply to a specific college, but you can choose to do an open application, which means we just get an algorithm to pick a college for you. But that's an additional aspect. And we also have, as I mentioned before, we have a deadline that's slightly earlier than most university applications. The other things that we ask for is if you're eligible for a pre-assessment, that is, if we make you do a pre-assessment as part of your application, you need to register for that. That's only specific subjects, and I've got some links later on in the PowerPoint where you can access the relevant information there. But mostly it's certain STEM subjects where we ask you to sit an assessment beforehand that just gives us a bit more information about your your academic caliber and your familiarity with certain concepts and certain critical skills. So you have to register for that independently of your actual Cambridge application. So that's really, really worth bearing in mind. We'll ask you to fill out what's called a supplementary application questionnaire. That's essentially just us wanting a bit more information from you, like class sizes, whether you've had teaching difficulties. You can put an additional personal statement in that. You don't have to, but sometimes if you're applying for a niche course or you really like an aspect of the Cambridge course you're applying to, you can talk about it there without offending your other university choices. And we might ask you for written work as well if you're studying humanities. But that's essentially all the additional stuff we ask for. And if you can refer back to this PowerPoint just to remind yourself of the extra things you might be asked for. And then there's not too much further to think about or stress about when you actually come to apply. So that now just brings me to the 3 main things that it is useful to be thinking about when making a Cambridge application, and those are the personal statement, those are and the admissions assessments and the interview. And the reason those are the most important is that they're the things that you can sort of do the most towards improving and doing a good and making a good submission. Obviously, you can do a great deal from now, for instance, to influence stuff like your teacher references and predicted grades and stuff like that. But in terms of concretely working on the application, these are the main 3 things that it's important to get right. So just a bit of information on the personal statement. It's basically a document that accompanies your, or in a sense, is your UCAS application, and it's about a side of A4, typed. It's meant to essentially tell the people reading it, admissions tutors, interviewers, what your interests are academically to do with the subject you're doing, what you've done in your spare time that relates to your subject. And it's also meant to give us a bit of a gist of, I suppose, what you actually understand about what the content you've been engaging with beyond A level. The main thing that we want, that any competitive university wants to see from an application, is that you have been going beyond the A level curriculum. You haven't just been doing your studies, you have been researching your subject well beyond that. You've been listening to podcasts, you've been writing about your subject independently, you've been reading books, for instance, of interest, where you've been reading articles that you can access, and also that you've been thinking about those. We don't want you to read everything under the sun to do with your subject, for instance, or practice every single topic you can think of in maths, but we do want you to have exercised a considerable degree of critical thinking in the stuff that you actually are looking at. And that's basically what goes into the personal statement. As I've said here, it's 80% academic, and it focuses primarily on what we call super-curricular, that's stuff beyond the A-level curriculum, and it reflects on this sort of stuff, and it doesn't just list it. It doesn't just say, I've read this book and this one and this one. It says, I looked at this book chapter, and I found it interesting for these reasons. Here are a few, concise thoughts I've had about it that sort of demonstrate that I actually understand what I've looked at and that I'm a promising applicant. So it's a document that requires a fair bit of work. You don't need to start writing this now, I wouldn't say, but the thing that you do need to start doing is building up the experience of doing these super-curricular activities so that you can actually say that you've done them and talk about them with a degree of sophistication. And the best way to do that is to keep some kind of notebook or Word document and try and set aside a bit of time, either every week or whenever you have, whenever you have time, to engage in content beyond the A-level curriculum. And I'm going to talk a bit about how to do that, or some more of the options for that in a second. So this is slide one of two of a few things that you can be thinking about. Supercurricular means a lot more than just reading further in your subject. Further reading is a big part of arts and humanities supercurricular engagement. Not so much for STEM, and I've got a separate slide on that actually in a second. But there's other stuff that you might not think sort of places like Cambridge are interested in. So, if you read someone's blog entry, for example, an academic's blog entry or something about a certain interesting topic, that counts as doing supercurricular engagement. You don't have to have read a whole, a whole book that is, recommended as part of an undergraduate course or something like that. You can have read somebody's modern take on some kind of problem or idea in a much more condensed and easily accessible form, and that also counts. You do want to have, if you're doing something like arts and humanities, you do want to engage in critical reading of more primary texts, for example. That's very useful, but that sort of stuff works just the same as well. Learning and practicing mathematics is a really important thing that I'll talk about in a second for any STEM students who do very mathematically orientated degrees. But doing things like reading groups of classmates, or even reading novels, even if you're not doing English, for example, that sort of stuff is also very useful, and it's stuff we want to hear about. Here are a few other suggestions as well. Taking online courses. There are a lot of free online courses. I haven't included them in this presentation, but I've got a few slides actually on that might be worth sharing when I distribute this as well, just on different places on the internet to go to find some of these materials so that you can sort of get started. So I'll include those as well. But online courses on certain free sites are really, really useful. And I don't think a lot of these need much elaboration, but this is a good one as well, looking at resources from undergraduate courses. Like I said, you don't need to have be reading stuff and looking at stuff from undergraduate courses, but if you look at a reading list, for example, that's accessible, from Cambridge, for instance, for your course, you might find interesting topics there that you then want to go into and explore a bit more. The other option is to base stuff on A-levels that you've done to explore A-level topics further, for instance, but there are a few other suggestions as well. But this is all the kind of stuff that we want to hear about in a personal statement, and it's the sort of stuff that you can start doing now and that you really should start doing now. And I'll emphasize again that it's very useful to keep a notebook or a Word document or just something that logs everything you do with stuff like this. I think that's sometimes quite hard to to actually act on, because reading a blog article, for example, doesn't necessarily seem like work that's worth jotting down, but making note of the link, making note of any relevant thoughts you've had about it, really does make writing something like the personal statement a lot easier. And that applies to any university, because by summer, if you started now, summer's months away, and you'd have hopefully you'd have a massive document filled with stuff that you've just that you've looked at, that you can refer back to, that you can look at your previous thoughts on, that you can reread, and that's all the stuff we want to see in a personal statement. So I'd really recommend that, and it's very good for other aspects like admissions assessments and interviews as well. Not to mention that if you're engaging at a good level in the stuff beyond the A-level curriculum, the chances are you're going to do better in your A levels. You're going to write more sophisticated exam essays. You're going to find that the mathematics, for instance, that you're doing slightly easier if you're engaging in higher level mathematics. It really does make quite a significant difference. So I've just there are two slides here that just sort of emphasize the point I made earlier about not reading everything under the sun. So the idea is that you try and be a bit selective about the stuff you read. Say at the moment you're interested in a few subjects, thinking about a few subjects at university. You might want to take a few interesting things from each topic, and you might, that are quite short, and you might want to engage with those in a focused way. So say you're deciding between history, human, social and political sciences, and I don't know, something like philosophy. You might, over the course of something like a month, maybe even longer, you might take a few things from each thing. You might take an extract of Descartes' Meditations, for example. You might take some of Hobbes's Leviathan or something like that, and you might just take a few extracts and read them closely, think about them, maybe read some nice encyclopedia articles about the things that you're looking at. And then you might ask yourself questions like, what's interesting about this? What's actually capturing my attention about the content that I'm looking at? And that's going to help you sort of make the decision about what you want to study. And it's also going to ensure that you're getting into the habit of doing super-curricular engagement in the right way. You're focusing on small things, small extracts of things, and you're really critically honing in on those, rather than, as the example I've got here, trying to read all of Marx, for instance, or reading something like, the Communist Manifesto, for instance, and thinking that then you've read Marx, when actually it would have been far better to have engaged in 2-3 pages of something a bit more complicated. So yeah, that would be my advice there. And then I've just got a few half-hearted suggestions about how you might sort of branch out in terms of finding some of these super topics to latch onto. So the thing I mentioned about looking at university course reading lists, finding new topics, taking topics you've enjoyed at school, and then there's this nice graphic, which two of them actually, which I think is useful for thinking about expanding your understanding of certain A-level topics. So this one's for arts and humanities. Say you've read The Handmaid's Tale in English and you've really enjoyed it. There are then some suggestions here, and there are obviously more. Think back to the slide I just had on, how many things count as super-curricular engagement, but there are some suggestions for how you might go about furthering your knowledge of this book or this topic that you've done in school. And this all counts as super-curricular stuff that we're interested in. The distinction in terms of writing a personal statement, would be this. What we don't want to see is you just telling us that you've read The Handmaid's Tale and then saying, oh, I've had these thoughts about it, because we'll probably go, yeah, that's interesting. Obviously you're good, but also we have your predicted grades and your teacher references and stuff. We know you're good at this subject. What we wanted to know was whether you'd done more engagement beyond A level and your thoughts about that stuff, because that demonstrates a capacity for independent study and thinking that's really, really useful at university. So if you'd instead said, oh yeah, I looked at The Handmaid's Tale in English, fair enough, but then I went and I read this book, or I read this critical review and I analysed this, and then these are my thoughts about that thing, then we'd probably say, yes, that's useful to know. That gives us an understanding of how you've engaged in independent study, how you've thought about material outside of the classroom. So hopefully that makes sense. And then here's just another graphic for sciences. It's slightly less exhaustive, but the idea is that this would be a way to treat a topic rather than a book. But for any topic, for anything that you're interested in at A level, you can take the list that I gave you earlier on all the things that count as super-curricular, and you can look into those things as well. And you can probably think of for the subjects you're interested in, you can probably think of more ideas than I can more in a more general way. So finally on this, the other really important thing is that if you're a maths student, basically, and if you're a STEM student that's going to be doing a lot of maths in their degree, it's not enough for supercurricular engagement to simply read, for instance, Hawking's Brief History of Time, and then say that you really like physics, because we're going to get a lot of we get lots of applicants who are really good at physics at A level, but what we want to see is that they're really enthusiastic about the mathematics element, for instance, of the course. We want to see that they are going to enjoy doing that stuff. If you're applying for English, yes, we do want to see that you've read novels and you like critically engaging with novels, because that's what you're going to be doing. And in the same way, we want to see that you like doing that in mathematics. So in the same way that you would pick a book for English or a book extract or something like that to engage with beyond A level, it's good to pick topics for mathematics or for mathematically related subjects. You don't have to practice them at undergraduate level, for instance, but it can help to try and explore topics that you've done, for instance, at a higher level than you have at A level. And there are lots of good sites for that. Isaac Physics is a really good one for physics, for example. I've got a few suggestions here, and these I think sort of just have a look up in your own time. But yeah, the crucial point is engaging with mathematics is essentially the novel reading of these sorts of subjects, and that's the main thing that we want to see. The more stuff that you engage with beyond A-level maths, A-level physics, A-level chemistry, the better your personal statement is going to look. So that's essentially it on personal statements. Now I'm not gonna really move through the other two bits in a particularly detailed way. I am going to give this text to you though when I distribute the presentation that sort of just outlines how everything works with admissions assessments and interviews. The key things really to remember for admissions assessments, firstly, is that they're either pre-interview or at interview. So you might be doing them well before you have the interview, and in which case you have to register for them. And on the next slide, I've got the link where you can see whether that applies to your subject, or you might do a sort of I suppose more tailored back assessment that sort of doesn't seem less official. What's the word I'm looking for? Just slightly seems like less of a big deal, I suppose, than a pre-assessment, because you don't have to register for it, and it seems like part of the interview process. But nevertheless, it's important. And you might have one of those. You'll never have both. You'll never be asked to do a pre-assessment and then an at interview assessment as well. And none of this is pass or fail. You are graded quantitatively, but it's not something where there are thresholds in the standard way, partly due to what I said earlier about the holistic way we look at admissions. The best way to practice for this, these are the links, by the way, to the relevant stuff. The first one is looking at whether you have a pre-interview or at-interview assessment, and then this is more detailed information on what the pre-assessments are, and for each subject. But in terms of preparing, we have a lot of resources online, actually on the links that I just provided, and I mean, really using those resources is the best thing you can do. I think people panic sometimes about this aspect of the application process, but really we have all of these things essentially online. We have we have a syllabus that tells you basically everything you could be asked questions about for the relevant pre-assessment. We have loads of practice papers and specimen papers, and we have we have mark schemes for those as well. So doing those past papers, making sure you can do them in timed conditions, is very useful. And for things like STEM subjects, knowing that you're going, knowing that you're not going to be asked any empirical content beyond A level is quite useful. You might be asked to think in a way that is a bit more demanding than A level on some occasions, but you're not going to be asked to know about stuff that goes beyond A level. So revising your A level syllabus as well as practicing with the resources we provide is just, that's the best thing to do, and that will take you enough time to practice in that way. But there's not much more to say by those. I've got two examples here that you can look over in your own time of just essentially what some of these assessments look like. This is from the history, I think, one that isn't a pre-assessment anymore, but is still a good indication of how an arts and humanities pre-assessment or at interview assessment might look. And the other is this one that I think we've used for ages now, actually, which is just this I'm led to believe quite easy example of a pre-assessment question in chemistry that a lot of people end up getting when they're asked at your level. So it's quite nice just to show people that the pre-assessment isn't always really incomprehensible and difficult. Actually, a lot of it is stuff like this, and the timing is normally the main part. It's about being able to do all the content in the allotted time and being able to move on to perhaps some of the more difficult questions in that time, having time to do them, which is why practicing past papers is, one of the best things you can do. Finally, there's a bit of content on interviews for you to look over. Interviews, they're normally seen as the most difficult and again incomprehensible part of the process. They're very much not. We would have looked at so much information by the time that interviews come around. They're very useful for us because they allow us to pick up on things that we didn't manage to see from the paper application, perhaps, that weren't included in a personal statement, for instance. And they also allow us to see whether candidates would do well in the kind of teachings, with the teaching style that we offer, the teaching system that we offer. One of the main and most expensive things about Cambridge and Oxford is that we have this supervision style format of teaching. It's one of the main reasons students want to apply to us. And, fair enough, because most people don't get this kind of they only get this kind of teaching at PhD level, for instance, where you sit down with an academic, typically one-on-one or two-on-one, and you literally discuss a big piece of work you've written in detail every week or so, at least, and or a problem sheet you've done in mathematics. And part of what the interviewer is doing is actually seeing whether or not candidates have the potential to do well in this environment. So actually thinking of interviews more like a bit of a trial lesson, where you're asking questions, you're allowed to get things wrong, where you're sort of outlining your thought processes and stuff, is a much better approach than rehearsing answers, for instance, and trying to appear like a lot of stuff about particular topics. Yeah, there's some stuff to look through. There's a video that I think outlines a bit of information, a bit more information on the interviews, and then I've got this as well, just a selection of things that might happen in the interview that it helps just to have looked over. I mean, this is so far away now that I think it's better. It's useful to have it in your mind, that it will take place, but very little preparation is needed now. The main things that you can do, however, to prepare for something like the interview is to do a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about already. So engaging with super-curricular content, working really hard at A levels, even doing stuff like preparing for pre-assessments can be quite helpful for an interview. The only other thing that you might want to do is to practice talking about your academic subject with other people. It doesn't have to be with someone doing the same subject, but the more practice you get in just articulating your thoughts about the subject you're doing or want to do, the easier the interview is going to seem, because it is more of an academic conversation rather than an actual, a test or a grilling or something like that. It really is us wanting to talk to you in the way that a teacher would talk to a student. So yeah, and that's why actually I included the discussion group comment in the what counts as a super-curricular activity, because setting up a discussion group with a few other students is a really useful way. You might read something or look at something every week or every month or something. That's a really good way to practice for the interview. Not necessarily much better, but you can do a lot more of that than having a mock interview, for instance. Mock interviews are very helpful, but you can do that. You can start, talking about your subject with other people from now. So, finally, and I realize I've overrun a little bit, so I think I'll stop in a second. But yeah, once you've done all of that, once the application is complete, you'll either receive an offer from us. Our standard offer for Arts and Humanities is A star AA, and for STEM it's A star A. And then it's just on you to meet the conditions of that offer. You might not receive an offer. That doesn't mean that you're not a really good applicant. It doesn't even mean that there's some kind of threshold that you didn't manage to meet as a really good applicant. And a lot of people who get rejected from Cambridge do end up, they go to very good competitive universities, but then if they fancy it, they'll sometimes come for a master's or a PhD or something like that once they finish their undergraduate somewhere else. And sometimes those applicants actually end up doing really well on postgraduate courses, for instance, because getting into something like Cambridge and Oxford really isn't the end game of the application process as a whole. And hopefully what I've been saying about course choice and stuff like that drives that home a bit, just in the sense that different universities offer very different courses. They're not always going to, just because Cambridge, for example, is seen as a really good university, doesn't necessarily mean that the politics course here is going to be the one that suits you best. It is always a really good idea to go to a university that where you like the teaching style and you like the course that's offered, and you think that you'd get on really well there. So and thinking less about the prestige of the university itself. So if aspects of Cambridge, like the teaching, like the course, do really speak to you, you do really think that those that you get on well there, then definitely apply. But don't think that it's the sort of don't think that not getting in is a really bad thing. The other thing that might happen is you might be placed in the winter pool. That just means that's just a way of us shuffling students around who we want to accept, but who a particular college doesn't have room for. So you apply to a college, and if that college has loads of students one year for a particular subject, they might say, these 7 students are good, we've only got a place for 4, we'll put the others in the pool. And that just means that other colleges can pick them out of the pool. I think there's about, gosh, what's the percentage? I don't know if I've put it on here, actually. No, I haven't. I want to say it's about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of getting taken out of the pool by another college. So it's not a definite thing, but that could have happened as well. And that just means that you might not go to the college that you actually applied to. So it's just worth bearing in mind. That's essentially it. Just to emphasize finally that the main things that we are looking for, it's this kind of stuff. It's whether or not an applicant would benefit from the teaching and the course that we have to offer, irrespective of their background. At Cambridge, we just look at the sort of the academic merit. We do view that in context, however. It's important to point out. In the context of school performance, in the context of any exceptional circumstances and stuff, we very, very much care about those sorts of things. We also want people who are really self-motivated, they're independent hard workers. That's another important thing. This gels with what I was saying about personal statements and why it's important to do super-curricular activities. When you're at university, especially when you're at somewhere like Cambridge or Oxford, you are doing a lot of independent study. So us being able to see that and see your capacity for that is really important. And obviously we want you to have good grades, and we want you to have the right combination of subjects for the course that you're doing at A-level. I mean, that's something that at this point, you know, you're doing your A-levels already, but it's useful to know that, you know, for instance, something like economics, if you want to apply to something like economics and you don't have further maths, it's useful to know that typically that doesn't sit too well. It's good to know that early on, because partly because what we do actually look for is, with this example, for instance, is whether or not a candidate is really competent in mathematics, and further maths gives us a bit of an indication of that, whether they'll succeed at economics at university level. And if, for instance, you suddenly have a change of heart and realise that you want to do economics but you haven't done further maths, you can always take, you know, the further maths the next year round, you know, and just do the standalone AS, or you can start engaging with content in further maths without doing the qualification, but saying, you know, in your personal statement, I've done this level of work in mathematics as well. So it's useful to know that for those kinds of situations too. That's all I've got to say. I mean, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that about summarizes it, and hopefully that gives you an understanding of the application process at Cambridge and the things that it's important to start thinking about now. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Will.
No worries.
So I'll just to introduce myself, my name's Jo Bishop. I'm the Careers Manager at City and Islington College. So yeah, thanks ever so much, Will, for that really fantastic comprehensive overview of the application process. And as Dominic said right at the start, it probably seems ridiculously early to be thinking about all of this. My son started A-levels, is in year 12, and I mentioned to him that we were doing this evening tonight, and he was a bit shocked that you would start thinking about your options at this stage when you've only been studying A-levels for a few months. But if you are going to be a competitive applicant, you do need to kind of put in all this work, and you know, Will's given so many top tips about the super-curricular, and as I say, my son is absolutely sick to death of me forwarding him links of various tasters and summer schools, and but yeah, I am also doing the same to Candy students via what we call Get Ahead News, which is a weekly newsletter. So hopefully your students, and if students are on the call, you're regularly reading that, because there's so many opportunities that you can access, and a lot of them are absolutely unique to Candy, so other students aren't getting these sorts of activities. So there is a Q&A. I know a couple of people have discovered it, so do have a think whilst we move on to the next slot. If there's any questions you'd like to ask Will direct, we'll have time right at the end. Equally, I'm happy to answer some, but I'm really pleased for the next slot is we're going to welcome Lati, who is actually an ex-student from Candy, who is in her, I can't believe she's actually in her final year of studying at Cambridge University, and we just thought it would be really useful for you to hear about her experiences of the application process and of studying. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, but again, if there's questions that you would like to ask, please do put them into the chat. So I'm just going to make you go in the picture, Lati. I'm getting an expert at producing these events now as well. So hi Lati, so do you just want to introduce yourself, say a bit about kind of what you studied at Candy, and I think it'd be really nice if you just shared a bit about when you decided you'd like to give Cambridge a go and why.
Absolutely, thanks Jo. So I'm Lati. I'm currently in my final year at Cambridge, Downing College specifically, and I'm studying human, social and political sciences, specialising in sociology. So at Candy, I studied sociology, politics, philosophy and psychology, and then I dropped psychology in my second year and went on with the other three. And in terms of making the decision to apply to Cambridge, it was always something that was in the back of my head. But I think I was very apprehensive when I first got to sixth form, and it was something that, you know, I didn't feel like I was capable of. In all honesty, I didn't have much confidence in myself, and through Candy, I got so many opportunities to actually interact with the process and learn more about the process. And I'd say that the Get Ahead News was a really key part of that. And, you know, with a bit of encouragement from my parents as well and the careers service, I decided that the best place for me to study what I was really interested in was Cambridge, specifically because of the interdisciplinary nature of the course and the fact that you can't really find that course anywhere else in that exact form. So that was really a key factor. And I think that as I continued engaging with topics of interest outside of the classroom, I just felt more and more inclined to apply to Cambridge. So I'd say that my journey is a little bit different to others because it did take me a while to get around and actually commit to the decision to apply. But once I did, I didn't look back, obviously, and I'm really glad that I went ahead with it.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So and really encouraging. You actually chose Cambridge because of the course. You didn't just get carried away with the fact that it was Cambridge. You looked at the course and really felt that that was the one that you would be suited to. So, I mean, how did you prepare, Lati? I mean, you've mentioned a few things. Did you attend any taster courses or summer schools or anything like that?
So again, going back to that newsletter, which is key, I found out about a summer school at Wadham College, Oxford. And even though I knew that I didn't want to apply to Oxford specifically because they didn't have a course that I really felt passionate about, I went ahead, I applied. It was a summer school that specialized in politics, which I was really interested in and which is part of my course itself. And so I went ahead, and it was a really great experience because I learnt how to interact in a supervision or tutorial setting. That was something that was really key. I got to prepare an essay over the space of a few days, which is exactly what I've been doing over my degree as well. So that was a really important part of my journey, I suppose. And it really helped me work out that applying to Cambridge was the right decision and it was the right direction to go in. I also attended the open day by the African and Caribbean Society at Cambridge. They hosted the first one when I was the summer just before year 13. So I attended that as well, found out loads about the application process and just life at Cambridge as an ethnic minority, as a Black person specifically. Things like that were really key for gaining extra insights and helping me work towards my application.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember you taking advantage of all these activities. So thinking about the application process, how did you find that, sort of thinking about the personal statement, the interviews? Can you share a bit about your own experiences of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bit of a grueling process, but in a really exciting way. It was really stimulating. I initially started by just doing the extra readings, reading the news, keeping up with what's going on, and just making that a part of my routine every day, even if it was 5 minutes, just making sure I knew how to contextualize what I was learning in the classroom and be able to link it to the real world. That was probably the foundation for me. And then going on to obviously do the open day or summer school, etc., and reading around the curriculum. I think that one other thing that really helped me was my extracurricular activities at Candy. I was involved in quite a bit of student journalism, and that again helped me with my research skills, helped me write about real issues, form opinions, think about opposing opinions and present them in a particular way. And also debating did the same thing. So I tried to feed all of these things into my preparation. And another thing that I made sure to do was to look at the reading lists that I could find for my course, the official ones for students, and I picked out 1 or 2 books that I thought would be interesting and, you know, not too difficult to read, just things that were accessible. And I read those in my own time, made notes on things I found particularly interesting and things I thought I could link to my essays, my own opinions, formed my further opinions on them as well. I also tried to attend public lectures at universities, which obviously now that's going to be a bit more difficult, but there's a lot going on online. So webinars, panel discussions, those sorts of things I would say were quite key to help just keep pushing me further in how I was thinking about my studies and thinking about the specific subjects within them. I also think that another thing that was key was just, I suppose, always thinking, what would someone argue in response to XYZ? So always thinking about opinions that are opposed to my own. That was really handy for the interviews in particular, because they tend to play devil's advocate just to push you and see how you respond. So knowing how you'd respond to these arguments, just like in an essay, I suppose, it's also really key, particularly for humanities courses. In terms of specific interview preparation, I was offered mock interviews by the college, which was really great and really handy. I think also just practicing in front of a mirror, which feels really ridiculous when you start, but it just helps you get into the flow of things. As Will was saying earlier, just getting into a habit of discussing your opinions, discussing the topics relating to your studies, and just getting into the habit of that and getting used to it and getting comfortable with it. Also, what was another part of the application process? It's been a while now. So the exam, so the assessment exam, that was one that I was really worried about, and I just tried to find as many resources online as possible. The university offers quite a few, and I just went through the past papers over and over and just tried to get comfortable with the format, and that was really all I felt I needed to do. And particularly for the essay section, where you're supposed to answer a question, at least for the HSPS exam, I really used my own studies and linked things in. Don't be afraid to do that. I also thought about all the things I'd been reading and tried to bring those in. So that was really useful as well. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of at the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's great. Would you say you enjoyed your interviews?
Yeah, I really did. They were quite nerve-wracking, but looking back, I remember coming out and just saying, you know what, those were actually really good, because they felt like a conversation about something I was passionate about. As cliche as it sounds, it was a conversation about something I'm passionate about with other people who are just as passionate. And I think that really is just the crux of the interview, and also supervisions, which, you know, they're based off of. So I think keeping that in mind was also really key, just knowing that I'm having a conversation with equals. They're not my superiors. We're just adults talking about something that we love, and they're going to play devil's advocate. But, you know, once you've considered all the different opinions, and, you know, you've also, if you've got more creative responses as well, that's really key. They seem to respond to that quite well. Coming up with things you probably haven't thought about before, that happens quite often in interviews and supervisions. They will bring all of that out of you. And I just remember coming out feeling great, really, a bit tired, because it was, you know, it was quite adrenaline bound and everything, but it was a great experience.
Oh, brilliant. And it obviously worked. So I'm just going to move on now, just to kind of the experience, I suppose, of studying at Cambridge. What would you say what was it like when you started? What were the first few weeks like?
So the first few weeks, typically when you go to university, you expect the first few weeks to be, you know, bit wild, freshers week and everything, and like the freshers week that extends into the entire term. At Cambridge, we didn't really have as much of that. We had a much shorter freshers week, still a really fun one. But what happened was we were given work quite early on, so it did mean that we had to really adapt really quickly. And so I think that was something that I had to prepare myself for, just not being plunged into it, but just starting the work and having to get my head into the game quite soon. And I remember just being really excited about my first essay, because it was on a topic that I'd studied before briefly, but I never really got to delve into. And it was a bit daunting because, you know, I was reading these big books that I borrowed from this old grand library, but once I started actually breaking things down and answering the question, it felt really attainable and really doable. And I think that another key thing is that once you get to uni and you start and you meet people who are in the same boat as you, that really helps with the process of adapting to things, because we're all going through it together and we're all in this whole new world together. And that was something that was really key for me. So it was a combination of, I suppose, adapting to quite a large workload, but also being quite excited about it because it was just the things I'd been longing to study further anyway. But yeah, also doing that in the context of a really supportive environment.
I mean, you touched on this a little bit. I mean, you obviously had friends, I'm sure, that went to other universities. I mean, how would you say how is the Cambridge experience different from perhaps friends who've been to other universities? Did you find you've got more work? Is it more intense, or, you know, how is it different?
I'd say yes. There is quite a bit more work, at least for my course and friends who are doing similar courses at other universities. I find that we get set more essays, without a doubt, but those essays don't count towards our final grades. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but you do have some flexibility and they are more of an opportunity to explore and discuss your ideas in supervisions and develop what you've learned in lectures, and so on. And so I think it's more of a difference in the style of teaching and learning, as opposed to it being a lot more difficult. It's just different, I suppose. The workload is much larger, but it's for a reason, and it's all working towards your exams in the end. And I think that sometimes, yes, I do envy my friends who get maybe 3 or 4 essays a term, and, you know, I'm churning out 12 of them a term, but you do get used to it. And I just enjoy always having something to do. And if you've always got an essay to do, then you can't really complain. And it really does help you structure your day as well, and prioritize what kinds of things you want to do in your free time, which has been really useful for me. I would also say, though, that in terms of the social life, I know that's kind of all gone up in the air now, but in terms of the social life, I think there are assumptions that at Cambridge you can't have one, or there's no time to let your hair down. There is time to let your hair down, and you appreciate it more because maybe you'll, you know, maybe go out with friends or go to a formal after you've finished your essay, and it just feels a bit more rewarding. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of bittersweet. I do find myself to this day envying some of my friends because they are at other unis that aren't as demanding, but also I don't mind because I like being able to explore my ideas, I suppose.
Yeah, brilliant. And you're kind of, as we said right at the beginning, you're nearing the end of your experience. So there'll be a lot of students who listen to this presentation who are trying to decide what to study at university. I know there's always a big concern about kind of, well, what can I do with this, this particular subject after I graduate? If I do English, does it mean I have to be an English teacher, etc., etc.? You're doing, like you say, sociology. So does that mean you have to be a sociology teacher?
No.
So what are your plans?
Funnily enough, when I first decided to study social sciences in general, I did have little comments of, oh, so you want to be a teacher? Being a teacher works for some people, but I don't think I'm cut out for it personally. I might teach at some point, but at the moment, I don't think I'm cut out for it. But at the moment, I am going through the process of applying to jobs, mostly at law firms, hopefully pursuing a training contract, which would mean I'd go to law school after I graduate. So I was under the assumption years ago that if you wanted to be a lawyer, you had to study law, and that's just not the case. That's just one example of a job that doesn't require a specific degree. There are always opportunities to continue studying. There are opportunities to gain other qualifications outside of a university context, and there are ways of upskilling yourself if you need to. And a lot of the time, jobs don't require a specific degree. And I really, really would encourage everyone who's listening to study the things that they genuinely love, because I was worried when I chose my A-levels that they weren't facilitating subjects, and that meant that I was doomed. But I thought, if I study anything, I have to study these because I love them and I know I'll do well in them. And I did, and then I ended up studying essentially the same thing at university. And now I don't feel limited at all by studying sociology. I don't feel that I have to go down one particular route. A degree is about gaining transferable skills. And the truth is that if you enjoy a subject, you're more likely to do better in it and get the grades that jobs and employers will require. So I'd say definitely, I'd recommend that everyone keeps that in mind, as opposed to binding themselves to a specific degree when they assume that you need it for a particular career path. There are some cases where you do, but for the most part, it's just not the truth.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really fantastic top tip to kind of finish on. Really, I think there's you genuinely just choose a subject that you're going to enjoy, because that's what you're going to succeed in. And there's so many different careers that you can do, no matter what degree you've actually studied. But at the same time, if you have a career in mind, obviously make sure you research and do the right subjects. So I think we're kind of at the end of our presentation. We hope we've given you a really good overview of and top tips of how to prepare. If you would